War is always a tragedy, but it need not be a moral abyss. And even in the heat of battle, the rule of law and the dictates of conscience shouldn't be abandoned. And yet, if the latest revelations are accurate, British special forces in Afghanistan crossed not merely a moral line, but committed acts that render the entire notion of ethical warfare hollow. And reports from over 30 UK veterans describe a harrowing pattern: detainees handcuffed and children executed, children shot in cold blood, the wounded summarily dispatched, false evidence planted to conceal the crime. These are not anomalies, these are symptoms of a systematic moral collapse and a routine that is at least tacitly approved by the system. The rejection of such brutality begins not with The Hague or Geneva, but with the Church Fathers. Augustine of Hippo, confronting the paradox of Christian participation in war, insisted that while war may sometimes be just, cruelty never is. Augustine is followed by Thomas Aquinas, who later codified this into a framework which is now called the just war theory. Within that, jus in bello, justice in war, demands three things: discrimination, proportionality, and military necessity. Combatants alone may be targeted. Civilians, detainees, and the defenseless are sacrosanct. That's something that should be emphasized, particularly in the Ukraine conflict. Proportionality, force should be proportional to military necessity. And again, that's something that Putin's forces fall foul of. The military necessity, only when necessary, should to achieve a legitimate aim, is military action appropriate. And but we are emasculated in our censure of countries like Russia or like Putin's Russia by our own failings, and not so much, and not only by our own failings, but by the tardy nature of the investigation and by the apparent effort to cover up the wrongdoing. The deliberate killing of handcuffed children is not a breach of these principles, it's a mockery of them. And that's something that comes out as one of the most headline grabbing issues in the Afghan war investigation. Philosophy is not silent either. In later years, Immanuel Kant declared that people must be treated as ends, not means. To execute a captive child to maintain a facade of success is the ultimate instrumentalization of life. From a utilitarian lens, such actions are not merely immoral, they are counterproductive. They sow hatred, they feed insurgency, they undermine alliance and sabotage the very goals they claim to serve, something that the Israelis should take to heart. The modern prohibition has, since 1949, been enshrined in law. The Geneva Conventions state plainly that violence to life and person, especially murder of all kinds, is prohibited in war, and additional protocols ban reprisals against civilians. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court defines war crimes as willful killing, torture or inhuman treatment, attacks on civilian populations. British law, via the ICC Act 2001 and the Armed Forces Act 2006, incorporates these intentional standards. There's no ambiguity here. These acts are absolutely criminal. And according to the BBC's Panorama, these the acts which are cited, the handcuffing of children, the killing of children, are not isolated incidents. Special forces reportedly executed detainees, falsified reports, and kept kill counts as if human lives were some sort of trophy in a video game. One veteran spoke of a child handcuffed and shot. Another recalled medics treating the wounded only for an operator to approach and shoot the man in the head. The description of the unit's culture, psychopathic, lawless, barbaric, is not just a condemnation of individuals, but of a system, and a British system. And it gets worse. Senior officers allegedly helped phrase reports to avoid Royal Military Police referrals. Commanders knew, perhaps even Downing Street knew. Hamid Karzai repeatedly warned Prime Minister Cameron, and little was done. A public inquiry is now underway, but it began in 2023, more than a decade after many of these events had finished. One's reminded of Bleak House, Dickens' portrait of justice delayed so long that it dies of apathy. The danger here is clear. Institutional decay becomes de facto impunity. And we are drenched in hypocrisy. We must be clear. The brutality of war can explain but can never excuse war crimes. If we demand high standards from our adversaries and our allies and our enemies, we must hold ourselves to higher standards still. To our own adversaries and other people's adversaries, I should have said. We must hold ourselves to higher standards. Hypocrisy is not refuted by silence. It's refuted by integrity. Yes, there will always be errors, and there will always be those who go beyond the acceptable in a war, the fog of war, and the temptation to violence. The problem with war is that it is licensed evil, and evil gets into your bones. But this is a moral test, not just for the military, but for the nation. And if we fail to pursue justice, and so far we have, not merely by inquiry, but by delay and by consequence, we become the very thing we claim to oppose. We must draw a red line, not in sand, but in law and conscience and result. For if we permit the handcuffing and the execution of children under our flag, then we are not defenders of the rule of law. We are its grave diggers, and we are responsible.